Okay, thank you, sir. And I apologize for running just a little bit late. I've had a full day, and we keep office hours until 6, so sometimes it's difficult for me to make a 7 o'clock meeting, but I was able to fortunately make this one at about 6:35. And I appreciate the invitation. Marty, I understand that you want me to focus particularly on the 10th Amendment. I'll give a brief presentation. And brief for me is anything 2 hours or under. And then I'll just open it up for questions and answers. If you've got those, I certainly want to stand ready to try to answer those to the best of my ability. And if you've got, of course, comments, happy to take those too. But let's start with some basics. First of all, I know that many of you have already heard me speak at one time or other. Some of you have even been through a course that I teach called the Institute on the Constitution. And to understand the 10th Amendment, one really needs to understand the full Constitution. Remember that an amendment is simply a change to, or an addition to, what was already there. So to fully understand the 10th Amendment, we must understand really the Constitution. And so I want to give a brief review. I may call on some of my IOTC grads maybe to give a review of those. Oh, now we see whispering and stuff going on. Let's take an overview of the Constitution. This, I think, will be helpful to us to understand the power that we have within the context of the Bill of Rights. First of all, we need to be reminded that there was no federal government until it was created. With most governments, that's not the history. Most governments, they were the result of conquest. You know, somebody under a checkered flag fought against somebody under a striped flag, and whoever won, it was the king or the prince that won the war, and they built the castle, and they set up the kingdom, and everybody was a serf or a noble or someone underneath the authority of the winning party. And we had a battle in this country to fight for our independence, but we had no king. There was great pressure, by the way, on the American colonies to appoint someone that would be much like a monarch. And our founders said, no, we fought to get away from this concept that there are certain people with a bloodline or an educational degree or with intellect or money. We fought to get away from the power and control of those people, and we believe that we can govern ourselves. Now that is a bold concept. That is almost unique in the history of the world. The idea that common man can govern himself. And just kind of let me draw a conclusion before I go much further with the context of history of the Constitution and tell you, if I may be so blunt, that one of the main reasons we are in the problems we are in today, locally, statewide, federally, is that we have left the governing to professionals, yes, quote unquote. It's a failure to govern ourselves. And if we would once again reclaim our right to govern, and to be involved in government, and to be informed, educated, participants, we would find that government takes on a drastically new face. But now it's done by the privileged few who don't want to be bothered by the citizens. They don't want to be bothered with your letters to the editor. They don't want to be bothered with your emails. They don't want to be bothered with your phone calls. They don't even want to be bothered with your coming to them at town hall meetings. I mean, the congressmen have even gone to the place that they give the facade of wanting to hear people's opinions by scheduling town hall meetings and then don't take questions. They don't take answers. They don't take comments. And they give their presentation and they want to take their armed security and leave. We've almost given over our country back to a situation prior to the Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to take your power back. And you do have power. And that power comes from God-given rights that are to be protected by the government. So let's start with that proposition. Historically, remember, the states preceded any federal government. A quick look at your Declaration of Independence is going to say that as a result of our declaring independence, that we are to be free and independent states. It's one of the questions that I give on the IOTC exams, and there's a trick answer there, and a lot of people fall for it. Did the Declaration of Independence create us as a free and independent nation? No, it did not. It said we are free and independent states. And so each state was sovereign. And as I've said before, it's important we understand this principle. The states created the federal government. Thereby, the states are sovereign and have more power than the federal government. The typical person in the American public believes it's just the opposite. They believe that the federal government is all-powerful and we just get the crumbs that fall from the rich man's table here in the states and local. It is the opposite. The people have the power. The people have the sovereignty. It is we, the people, that created the government. And as a result, they are to do our bidding. But what happens when the master never shows up to inspect what's going on? Ever hired anyone before? Maybe to do lawn work, maybe a supervisor in the company. And you hire someone and say, here's your list of things to do. And then you leave for a month. And come back. And what's happened? I mean, it takes a rare employee, doesn't it, to stay after the stuff and to be honest and do the job they're supposed to do for the pay that you've offered to give them and so forth. And we are the employers, and we have failed to watch our employees. We have failed to even remind them that they are the employees. And in fact, we've been gone so long that the employees now act like that they're the people who own it.
Yep.
Right? Don't bother me, we're the owners now, and we've abdicated our rights and our privileges as the sovereign. So, what do we have to do? We have to understand historically how we can claim our title. Our title comes according to this rationale. It's very simple. The people and the states created the federal government. Point number two, the creators have authority over the created. With me so far?
Yep.
If you make it, you've got authority over it. We've made it. The Declaration even says that the people have the right to abolish any government that becomes oppressive and usurps authority. See, that's what puts me on a list. Because I bother to say that the people have the right to overthrow the government. I stand with our founders.
Yes.
I had this conversation. I say it publicly virtually anytime I speak, but I spoke with this very wealthy Western Tennessee company owner just last week. And he is one whose company, shouldn't give his name or the name of the company, but they advertise on Glenn Beck and advertise on people like Alex Jones and I mean all the radicals, quote unquote. We were having this conversation and I said, you know, when I speak, I tell people that I'm so far right, I'm about to fall off the edge of the universe. I'm so far right. I've only found one group to the right of me. And he goes, oh, I know. I said, who's that? He says, the founders. And I said, that's right. I said, the founders are about the only group I've found that's more far to the right than me. And then I told him something he hadn't heard before. And many of you have heard it. I said, do you know how I know the founders were farther to the right than me? He said, how? I said, because I haven't started shooting yet. He goes, huh? You mind if I use that? And I said, have at it. But we need to make this personal, friends. I want to remind you, our founders started shooting. This is not a fairy tale. Okay? This is not something that somebody wrote up in fiction, or it's not something that, you know, some vision that somebody had. This is real life. These people pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to say, but out of my life, I can govern myself. But they had a passion. They had a commitment. The question is, where are we? Do we have the character that it takes to stay the course, to understand the course, to know what we are to do, to work together? By the way, it wasn't one man that stood up and said he was going to do it. It was 56 that signed. And by the way, when they signed, they represented the people back home. So it's going to take more than a handful. I mean, we're not going to be able to organize and change things and take our, as I've said before, you can't take your ball bats and your pitchforks and your torches and your rocks down to the federal courthouse and storm it and hope to have any result. They got plenty of room for us inside. They got holding cells in there. It's not going to work. But there has to be an organized plan. We all have to get on the same page. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to have to do what our founders had to do. They gave up of their own personal time. They sacrificed. They left their economic benefit back home. And they took long trips at much personal sacrifice. And the majority of their trips were long distance and bad weather. Extremely hot. When we think it's hot in here tonight, go to Independence Hall. When they were performing the Declaration in a hot July. May, June, and July. And think of what it was like with no air conditioning. And then they went in the dead of winter. They endured hardship. And reminds me of, sometimes our commitment reminds me sometimes of that long love letter that this young man actually wrote to his fiancée, telling her about how much he loved her. He would, in the strongest rain or in the coldest weather or whatever like that, his love for her was unfailing, and he would look after her and so forth, and I'll be over tonight if it doesn't rain. You know? And boy, we talk a good talk, don't we? Oh, we talk a good talk, but where's our commitment? The question is, are there any patriots alive with the spirit of our founders who will spit in the devil's eye, who will call a communist, who will stand and not retreat and not run? Do we have anyone alive who will do that? And you can't do it yourself. You're going to have to yoke up with other people of the same mind, of the same spirit. And by the way, there'll be infiltrators, just like there were with our founders. There'll be pretenders who come along. You may have to deal with them as pretenders. Maybe do some of the early reading of our founders and find out what happened to hypocrites and pretenders and spies. You may have to get a little tough. Do we have what it takes? There's the question. And by the way, and I've said this before, and I've done, maybe not all I can do, but a lot towards trying to remedy this problem. But I would highly recommend this to be one of the primary objectives of the 912 project. If you can possibly do this, I'm going to tell you that we have lost the battle if we keep preaching to the choir.
Yep.
We've got to take back our school system or close it down.
Here, here.
I'm telling you the truth, I would rather have no education system than the one we have now.
Right.
But they have none.
Yep.
Okay? You can teach people to count on their 10 fingers. I can teach somebody to read in 6 weeks and get hooked on phonics and learn to read.
Yep.
I had someone the other day complain to me about our educational system. They said something along the lines of, we're spending all of our time with them out of class in sports or art or all these other things. And I said, well, I'd rather have that than have them in the classroom. I mean it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a legitimate function. That's not what our schools are for. But consider the alternatives. Man, let them out and let them play, you know, let them play on the football field or the basketball or throw a frisbee or whatever. It's better than being in the brainwashing classroom.
Here, here.
So, if we don't get to the next generation, you folks who are leaders in 912, if you can visualize some way what it's going to take, and you may remember I was here the last time the last time Dr. Kirk came here within the last couple of years and gave a presentation. It's more mumbo jumbo, and for those of you that were here, you may remember I told her that to her face. It is mumbo jumbo. It is nonsense. And we have limited time to correct this problem.
Yep.
So how do we do it? We have to reclaim our rights under the 10th Amendment. What does that mean? Remember, first of all, the people and the states created the federal government. They do our bidding. Remember that they have limited authority. The limited authority that they have is found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That outlines, depending on how you number it, 19 or 20 is the way I would number it, powers that are given to the federal government. Remember that Article 1 of the Constitution is the legislative branch. And what Congress has power to do is to make laws in those categories, those 18 or 19 categories. Outside that, they have no authority. Then we have Article 2, the executive branch. That's the president. The executive is the person who executes the law. That means carries out the law. It's common sense. It is based on principles of logic that if there is no power to make a law on a topic, there is no law to execute. If you can't, in Article 1, if Congress can't make a law about it, there's no law for the Article 2 president to carry out. And there is no judicial authority in Article 3 to hear any cases. So our federal government is so blown out of proportion. They're involved in so many fields that they ought not be involved in. And we can't even get our congressmen to read the Constitution and say they understand it. And to vote what the Constitution says. But the 10th Amendment to the Constitution tells us that the rights not given to the federal government by this Constitution, nor prohibited by it, the Constitution, to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So let me be just as blunt as I know how to be. There is no federal authority for a Department of Education.
Nope.
That's reserved to the states. That's reserved to the people. There is no authority for a Department of Energy. There is no authority for Housing and Urban Development. There is no authority for the Environmental Protection Agency. There is no authority, and the list goes on and on. Fully 2/3 of the government is invalid under the Constitution. What do we do in the 10th Amendment? We reclaim our rights. Now there is an organization, it may have been used within the last 3 or 4 weeks, by being one of those organizations that was specifically targeted by the Internal Revenue Service for scrutiny as a 501c3 or C4 organization. I don't know if you've heard of the organization or not, but I want to tell you about it tonight. The organization is called the 10th Amendment Foundation. It is located in Virginia. Anyone ever heard of the 10th Amendment Foundation? You have? Okay. The director of that organization is Strother Smith. Anybody know or ever heard of Strother Smith? Okay. Strother Smith he is an attorney. He is also directing this 10th Amendment Foundation. He is suggesting that he and his other organizations that have gotten this kind of treatment are going to actually file a lawsuit, I guess, against the government, the Internal Revenue Service, for the denial of their 501c3 or 4 status. And I would urge you, if you have an interest, I think it is one of the most effective tools that we can use, is to reclaim our rights under the federal government, to remove those rights, and to give those rights back to the states and to the people. So, Marty maybe, or some of you other leaders here with the 912 can look into the 10th Amendment Foundation. I went to check their website today, and it said that they're down for repairs or something along that line. And I don't know if that's on purpose or if that's something from the IRS. Who knows? I don't know if you all know this or not, but I've heard rumors that they're getting access to our information. Anybody ever heard about that? Maybe they... Shocking. Shocking. In any event, many of us are kind of pleased to say that somebody finally ratted on them what we've known they've been doing for 15 or 20 years. And that's Democrats and Republicans both, by the way. Let's not be confused about that. Both parties have been about no good when it comes to people's privacy and data mining. So in any event, I hope that it's voluntary on the 10th Amendment organization's part that they're down. But I encourage you to check in with Strother Smith. He might even be willing to come down and speak for you sometime. He and I have shared the stage before in speaking engagements, and I don't know how far he's willing to travel, but in any event, I would encourage you to get hooked up with him. So the idea for the 10th Amendment, friends, is that the federal government is far too large. We have constitutional authority to take these powers back to the states and to the people. Well, let's talk some practicalities. How do we do this? First of all, I've been in contact with all of my representatives. All my representatives on the state level, plus some that don't represent me. And I've told them, you have got to reduce our reliance on federal funds.
Yep.
We've got to. The federal government has little authority to control what happens in the state unless the states or the locals take funds. And this is how they control it. It's how they control education.
Common Core.
Okay? Yeah, Common Core is one example of many others. No Child Left Behind, and anything that you figure in education, all these other things, they have control because we sign up for it.
Yep.
We sign up. Yeah, we'll do it because we want your money. And we fail to remember that it's not their money, it's our money. And we just have to have the courage to say no. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. Tennessee has been able to balance its budget this year. This last General Assembly passed a balanced budget. Glad to see that. Glad we're not living beyond our means. Federal government can take some clues from that. Our local government is pleased to show us that they're balancing their budget. But I've asked our local commissioners, and I've asked our state representatives, our senators, to say this question. What happens if we have no federal funds? Is our budget balanced then? And boy, eyes roll. Oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding. No, there's no way. You really asked that question? Think we can balance the budget without federal funds? It's okay, then we've sold our soul.
Yep.
Haven't we? We've sold our birthright for a pot of porridge. Haven't we? Yep. This is what we've done. And we've got to say no. We've got to have the character to step up and say, no, I will not take it. I will do without. I will let my life be harder if necessary. Okay? I will get less money from my investments if necessary. I will pay my own way to go to the state parks or national parks if necessary. I will do what's necessary. But no, 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 I will not continue to accept federal funds. We've got to cut the strings to the federal government. Lest you don't know, I'll give you something that is perhaps shocking. In the last IOTC that we taught, I actually added the 13th session. And in that 13th session, we covered a variety of current events. In that 13th session, there wasn't a lecture by John Eidsmoe, and there wasn't a test or quiz. It was current events. Where are we on things like immigration and the budget and 10th Amendment and all these kind of things. And I showed a video. It's about 3 minutes. You can find it on YouTube, in which an accountant did a study of our federal government and its budget. And he went in the year 2012 to the White House website to look at the budget that's been approved by the President. Of course, you know our Congress has not voted for a budget in a long time. But at least the working budget that they're working off of. And here's what this accountant found. He went to the budget to ask himself the question, what has to happen for us to balance the federal budget? What do we have to do? And he said, let's start with the proposition that we don't take in any more money, because he was not an advocate of more taxation. He said, let's assume that we're taking in all the money that we're now taking in, that we're spending more. What do we have to cut? And so he went about looking at what has to be cut. And so he went first to the departments like we've talked about. What happens if we cut, what happens if we cut out the Department of Education? What happens if we cut out the Department of Energy? What happens if we cut out the Department of Labor? What happens if we cut out all of these? And he started adding up the numbers. He goes, that's not enough of a cut. He goes, my goodness, what are we going to have to cut? So goes into other things. He looks what we're going to have to cut. He comes up with other things. Adds them all up. Still don't have enough. Haven't cut enough. So he starts saying, well, okay, let's look at what about our national parks? What about all the federal historic things? What about all the foreign aid to other countries? What about everything we contribute to the United Nations? Let's just cut that back to zero. Now where do we stand? We still haven't cut enough.
Yep.
He keeps looking, and he keeps looking, and he finally gets to the place, well, what if we shut down our military? We cut down our military. I mean, that's a big budget item. Let's just get rid of the military. Then where are we? We still haven't cut enough. You know what he found out? You can't balance the budget by shutting down the whole federal government. I'm telling you, no more Congress, no more Supreme Court, no more federal courts, send everybody home, we're still in the deficit. This tells you how significant our economic problem is. Our interest on our national debt plus our entitlement obligation through Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Veterans Affairs, and things that we've promised other people and that we've already taken in money for and spent. It's what already happened. We already took the money in and we spent it. Those categories themselves are more than what we take in every year through all resources. And I've been saying for 15 years, there's no chance of our federal government ever recovering economically. I'm not talking about a slight chance. I'm telling you, as we stand here today, as I stand and you sit, there is no chance, 0% probability, 0% possibility that our federal government comes out of this economic situation with our dollar intact. It is only a matter of time. And what's going to happen if the federal government stops sending checks? Then the states that are relying on the federal government are also upside down. And the local communities that are relying upon it are also upside down. Everybody goes bankrupt. Everybody goes bankrupt. You understand the severity of the problem? So the 10th Amendment, friends, is the only hope that we have, is for us to reclaim our rights and to say no to bigger government. We must say no to bigger government on every level. And I mean that means that we may have to do without. That's what our founders had to do. They had to do without. They had to give up their fortunes to fight for principles. And as you know, the easiest way to win a war is just to buy off the other side. Have we, as the American public, been bought off?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
At some point, yeah.
There is a quote that we have in our RAFP issue alert, and it's a standing quote that we have in there every month. Really addresses the problem. The way to take control of your enemies and to enslave them. Some people might say it's through the A-bomb. No. Through the N-bomb. No. Through, I don't know, invisible airplanes or, things like, stealth, this or that. You know what it is? Through bounties, donations, and benefits. Through bounties, donations, and benefits. And they're enslaved. We have become a dependent people. We have voluntarily turned over the Declaration of Independence and become dependent. Now, some of you may have heard this story before, but I think it bears repeating. I had an interest in one time of going down to the local University of Tennessee Ag office for a course called Beef Masters. Anybody here ever been to the Beef Masters course? Anybody? Anybody ever done the UT Extension? Anything like that? They do an excellent job, by the way. We have very knowledgeable people down at the UT Extension offices. They're in the courthouse annex. Milton Orr, by the way, maybe you've heard that name, is the guy that I think is the one that's director of that office. And they have an excellent course. I heard it was highly recommended. So I said, I want to sign up for that course. I want to sign up for that Beef Masters course and learn what I can about cattle and agribusiness and so forth. And so I filled out an application and sent it in, and it said $150 would pay for that course. And they said, if you will give us, if you will sign up for a state of Tennessee premises ID number, okay, and you'll send that in, we'll pay for half of the course. We'll pay $75 towards your $150 course. All you have to do is just sign up for the premises ID, tell us what animals you've got, where your farm is, and send it in and get a number, say, listen, after your course is paid for. Well, I sent in my whole $150. I got a call back from the office. remember the lady's name, very polite lady there.